The old cart rattled along the dusty road. Evelyn clutched her worn leather bag, her gaze fixed on the village ahead. Blackwood. Even its name whispered of forgotten things, of secrets buried deep. The sun, a pale disk behind a veil of mist, did little to pierce the gloom that seemed to cling to the surrounding forest. Trees, gnarled and ancient, loomed like skeletal guardians, their branches intertwined, forming a canopy that choked the light. Evelyn shivered, drawing her shawl tighter. She had craved solitude, a place untouched by the clamour of the city, to pursue her research. Blackwood, with its whispered legends and crumbling stone cottages, promised to be the perfect sanctuary. Yet, as the cart lumbered closer, a prickle of unease ran down her spine. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the creak of the cart's wheels and the rustle of leaves in the oppressive stillness. The village seemed to hold its breath. Cottages built of dark stone lined a single cobblestone street. Their windows, dark and empty, stared back at her like the eyes of watchful crows. No laughter echoed from within, no sounds of life, just that unsettling silence, broken only by the distant caw of a crow and the whisper of the wind through the trees. Evelyn walked slowly, her footsteps echoing on the cobblestones. A few villagers, faces etched with a weariness that seemed older than time itself, moved like shadows through the narrow lanes. They glanced at her briefly, their eyes wary, before quickly looking away, their faces shuttered. No one spoke, no one smiled. She reached a small square dominated by a stone well. Its iron handle, rusted with age, seemed to claw at the air. A group of children, their faces pale and drawn, huddled near the well, their eyes fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. They fell silent as she approached, their play forgotten. Evelyn tried a smile, hoping to ease the palpable tension. The children simply stared, their silence more unsettling than any whispered threat. Turning away, Evelyn felt a chill travel down her spine. Even the children, who should have been filled with laughter and light, seemed touched by the darkness that clung to Blackwood. It was as if the village itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, or perhaps waiting for someone. The old woman at the village store barely looked up as Evelyn approached. Her face, a roadmap of wrinkles, was etched with a lifetime of unspoken stories. "I'm Evelyn Thorne," she began, her voice echoing strangely in the stillness. "I've come to stay at the old miller's cottage." The woman grunted, her eyes fixed on the jars of sweets lining the counter. "Don't stay long," she muttered, her voice raspy as if unused. "This place doesn't like strangers." She gestured vaguely towards the forest edge, her hand trembling slightly. Evelyn felt a shiver run down her spine. The woman's words, spoken with such quiet conviction, held a weight that belied their simplicity. The shadows in the corners of the shop seemed to deepen, as if something unseen listened intently to their exchange. "The forest?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely a whisper. The old woman nodded, her pale eyes flickering towards Evelyn for the first time. "The woods hold shadows, child, shadows that whisper and watch. Best stay clear." She glanced at the setting sun, her face creased with worry. "Nightfall's coming. Get inside. Lock your doors." The miller's cottage was small, its stone walls cold and damp. Dust lay thick on every surface, and the air hung heavy with the scent of disuse. Evelyn lit a fire in the hearth, the crackling flames doing little to dispel the chill that seemed to emanate from the very walls. As darkness fell, shadows danced in the flickering firelight, twisting and turning into grotesque shapes that sent shivers down her spine. Unpacking her trunk, she stumbled upon a loose floorboard. Curiosity piqued. She pried it open. Inside, nestled amongst cobwebs and dust, lay a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages, brittle with age, crackled as she opened it. The handwriting was spidery, the ink faded, but the words, penned with a desperate urgency, sent a chill down her spine. The whispers grow stronger, the journal began, the writer's fear palpable even after all these years. They torment me day and night. They speak of shadows that walk in daylight, of sacrifices made to appease the hunger that lurks in the woods. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. The words seemed to leap off the page, filled with a terror that transcended time. She read on, each entry more chilling than the last. The writer, a young woman named Sarah, spoke of strange occurrences in the village, of disappearances, of a darkness that seeped from the forest, poisoning the very air they breathed. The journal ended abruptly, the last entry a frantic scrawl. "He's coming for me! I can hear him in the shadows, calling my name. God help me, A sudden noise outside the cottage made Evelyn jump. The fire crackled, sending a cascade of sparks up the chimney as a gust of wind rattled the shutters. Clutching the journal to her chest, Evelyn felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to press closer, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. She was not alone in the cottage. She was not alone in Blackwood. The village library was a cramped, musty room tucked away above the post office. Dust motes danced in the pale light that filtered through the grimy windows, illuminating shelves stacked with ancient tomes. The air hung heavy with the scent of mildew and forgotten things. Evelyn ran her fingers along the spines of the books, their leather covers cold and damp beneath her touch. She had spent the past few days poring over the journal she had found in the cottage, each chilling entry fueling her desire to uncover the truth behind Blackwood's darkness. Sarah's words hinted at a history steeped in fear and sacrifice, a history the villagers seemed determined to keep buried. She hoped the library, with its treasure trove of local lore, might offer some answers. A hacking cough broke the silence, and Evelyn turned to see a man seated at a table in the corner. He was hunched over a large volume, his face obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. As he looked up, Evelyn saw a pair of piercing blue eyes, startlingly bright against the pallor of his face. He had a kind face, etched with lines that spoke of both wisdom and weariness. Father Matthias, the man introduced himself, his voice raspy as if he rarely used it. He gestured to the book in front of him. The Annals of Blackwood, full of births, deaths, and the occasional scandal. Not exactly riveting reading, but it keeps me occupied. His lips twitched in a wry smile, but his eyes remained shadowed, as if haunted by something he had witnessed within those very pages. Evelyn hesitated, unsure how to broach the subject that had brought her to the library. She had learned from the villagers that Father Matthias was the keeper of Blackwood's history, both its joys and its sorrows. He had seen generations come and go, heard countless confessions whispered within the confines of the village church. If anyone held the answers she sought, it was him. "Father Matthias," she began, her voice barely a whisper in the stillness of the library, "I found something in my cottage, a journal. It spoke of strange things happening in Blackwood, things the villagers don't talk about." The priest's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of weary resignation. He sighed, running a hand through his thinning grey hair. "Blackwood has its secrets, Miss Thorne, secrets best left buried." He looked at her then, his blue eyes intense, searching. "Some stories are not meant to be told. Some truths are best left undisturbed." Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. The priest's words were not a dismissal, but a plea. He knew more than he was willing to say, burdened by a knowledge that weighed heavily on his soul. She had stumbled upon something dark and dangerous, something that had haunted Blackwood for generations. "But people are in danger," she countered, her voice firm despite the tremor that ran through her. "Sarah, the woman who wrote the journal, she disappeared, and others before her. Don't they deserve justice? Don't their stories deserve to be told?" Father Matthias looked away, his gaze fixed on the dusty windowpane. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words and the weight of shared fear. Outside, a crow cawed, its cry sharp and mournful, echoing Evelyn's own sense of unease. Evelyn left the library, Father Matthias's warning echoing in her ears. Despite his reticence, she was more determined than ever to unravel the mystery that shrouded Blackwood. The villagers might choose to remain silent, but she would be their voice, the keeper of their forgotten truths. As she made her way back towards the village square, she noticed a young girl sitting on the edge of the well, her legs dangling over the side. She wore a faded blue dress, her dark hair falling in tangled waves over her shoulders. She was humming softly to herself, a haunting melody that seemed to rise from the well itself. Evelyn had seen the girl around the village, always on the periphery, her large, watchful eyes absorbing everything. The villagers called her Alice, whispered rumors about her strange connection to the forest, her uncanny ability to appear and disappear like a wisp of smoke. Some even claimed she spoke to the trees, that she knew the secrets hidden beneath the forest floor. As Evelyn approached, the girl turned, her eyes dark and fathomless, fixing on Evelyn with an unnerving intensity. They held a wisdom beyond her years, a knowledge that sent shivers down Evelyn's spine. For a moment their eyes locked, and Evelyn felt a strange connection, as if the girl were peering into her very soul. "She's waiting for you," Alice whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle lapping of the water against the well's stone rim. Her gaze drifted towards the tree line, where the shadows stretched long and deep, beckoning like skeletal fingers. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "Who's waiting for me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alice tilted her head, a sly smile playing on her lips. "The forest. It's always listening, always watching. It remembers everything you see, every whisper, every secret. It's hungry for stories, for the truth." She stood then, brushing past Evelyn, her touch light as a feather. "Don't go into the forest," Alice warned, her voice taking on a chilling urgency. "It doesn't like to let go of what it takes," and with that she disappeared into the shadows of the trees, leaving Evelyn alone with the echo of her words and the growing sense of dread that coiled in the pit of her stomach. The forest called to her, its silence both alluring and terrifying. It held the answers she sought, she was sure of it, but at what cost? Alice's warning echoed in her mind, a stark reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath Blackwood's idyllic facade. But fear, she knew, was a powerful motivator, and she would not be deterred. She would face the shadows, even if it meant staring into the abyss itself. The path to the Hollow Manor was overgrown, choked with weeds and tangled vines. Each step was an effort, as if the very earth itself resisted her approach. The trees pressed closer, their gnarled branches forming a tunnel of shadows that led towards the manor, like claws reaching out to snatch her into the wood's embrace. The air grew colder, the silence deeper, broken only by the frantic hammering of her own heart. Evelyn paused at the edge of the clearing, her breath catching in her throat. The Hollow Manor stood before her, a spectre against the stormy grey sky. It was a grand old house, once a testament to wealth and power, now a crumbling monument to decay and despair. The windows, like vacant eyes, stared back at her, their glass shattered, reflecting the dying light of the afternoon sun. She had seen the manor in Sarah's journal, its image etched in ink as if burned into the very pages. Sarah had written of its oppressive presence, of the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes following her every move. Evelyn had dismissed it as the ramblings of a frightened woman, but now, standing before the manor, she felt a shiver run down her spine. The silence here was different, heavier, as if the air itself were thick with unspoken words and forgotten screams. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the clearing, her footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the stillness. The manor loomed closer, its shadow stretching out to engulf her. She could feel its presence now, cold and watchful, like a predator sizing up its prey. And in that moment she knew that she had made a terrible mistake. The air inside the manor was stale and cold, thick with the smell of decay and dust. Cobwebs hung like macabre tapestries, and the only light came from the few remaining panes of glass in the windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the dusty floor. Evelyn stepped cautiously, her hand trailing along the cold stone wall, her footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. The grand foyer, once a place of warmth and welcome, was now a graveyard of forgotten memories. A chandelier, its crystals long since vanished, hung precariously from the ceiling, casting grotesque shadows that danced and swayed in the faint breeze that whispered through the broken windows. Beneath it, a grand staircase, its once polished wood now rotten and splintered, led to the upper floors, its darkness promising secrets best left undisturbed. As Evelyn moved deeper into the manor, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the creak of floorboards beneath her feet and the rustle of unseen things in the walls. Whispers seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves, faint and indistinct, like the ghosts of conversations long past. She paused in what had once been a grand ballroom, its walls lined with faded tapestries depicting scenes of hunts and feasts. Now the tapestries hung in tatters, their colours muted with age, their figures seeming to stare out at her with accusing eyes. The floor, once polished to a mirror shine, was now covered in a thick layer of dust, undisturbed for years, perhaps decades. And yet, as Evelyn stood there, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had just been there, that their footsteps had left faint impressions in the dust, impressions that were quickly being erased by the passage of time. Evelyn continued her exploration, each room she entered a testament to the manor's slow and inexorable decay. She found a library, its shelves still lined with books, their leather covers crumbling, their pages brittle with age. She found a nursery, its crib empty and cobwebbed, a rocking horse frozen mid-gallop in the centre of the room, its painted eyes seeming to follow her as she moved. It was in the master bedroom, however, that she made her most unsettling discovery. The room was surprisingly well preserved, as if someone had been in there recently, dusting the furniture and airing out the linens. A fire crackled cheerfully in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the heavy four-poster bed and the ornate vanity that stood against one wall. Evelyn approached the vanity, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings on its surface. As she leaned closer, she noticed a small oval-shaped mirror propped up against the back of the vanity. It was covered in a thick layer of dust, but as she blew it away, she gasped. The mirror reflected her image back at her, distorted and grotesque. Her eyes were wide and frightened, her face pale and drawn. But that wasn't what made her heart skip a beat. It was the figure standing behind her, its face obscured by shadow, its eyes glowing with an eerie, malevolent light. Evelyn whirled around, her heart pounding in her chest, but the room was empty. She was alone. The mirror, now free of dust, reflected only her own terrified face. She had imagined it, she told herself. It was the shadows, playing tricks on her mind, amplifying her fears. But even as she tried to rationalize what she had seen, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air in the room seemed to have grown colder, and the silence was now oppressive, suffocating. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled with awareness, as if she were being watched by unseen eyes. She had to get out of there. She had seen enough. Turning to leave, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Scratched into the dusty surface of the vanity, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a symbol. It was a circle bisected by a vertical line with three smaller circles arranged in a triangle above it. Evelyn recognized the symbol from Sarah's journal. It was the mark of the entity, the creature that haunted the woods, the creature that the villagers feared, the creature that Sarah had warned her about. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't alone in the manor. She wasn't safe. The entity was here, watching her, toying with her, and it was only a matter of time before it decided to make its move. The symbol seared itself into Evelyn's mind, a brand of fear that chilled her to the bone. The entity was real, no longer a figment of folklore or a ghost story whispered around a flickering fire, but a tangible presence, its mark etched into the very fabric of the manor. A wave of nausea swept over her, and she stumbled back from the vanity, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. She fled the master bedroom, her footsteps echoing through the manor's desolate halls. The shadows seemed to twist and writhe around her, taunting her with glimpses of unseen horrors. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she had seen, of the truth that had been hidden for so long. The villagers, Father Matthias, Sarah's journal, all pointed to a darkness that had seeped into Blackwood, a darkness that was ancient, insidious, and very real. Reaching the grand foyer, she paused, her hand gripping the banister for support. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hammering of her own heart. She had to tell someone, had to warn the villagers. But who would believe her? They had lived with their fear for so long, had built walls of silence around the truth. Would they thank her for shattering their fragile peace, and for unleashing the darkness they had tried so desperately to contain? Doubt gnawed at her. What if she was wrong? What if it was all in her head? The journal, the symbol, the fleeting glimpse in the mirror. Perhaps the isolation, the oppressive atmosphere of the village had finally taken its toll, warping her perception, pushing her to the brink of madness. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Evelyn found herself on the steps of the village church, its oak door weathered and worn. The setting sun cast long shadows across the churchyard, the weathered headstones standing like silent sentinels, their inscriptions barely visible in the fading light. Doubt still lingered, but it was overshadowed by the chilling certainty that something was terribly wrong, a truth that lay buried beneath layers of fear and denial. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy door, the hinges groaning in protest. The interior was dim, lit only by a few flickering candles that cast dancing shadows across the worn pews and the simple altar at the far end of the nave. The air was thick with the scent of incense and something else, something ancient and vaguely unsettling, like the lingering memory of a forgotten fear. Father Matthias stood at the altar, his head bowed in prayer. He looked smaller, somehow more fragile than she remembered. The lines on his face seemed deeper, etched with a weariness that spoke of a burden carried for far too long. As if sensing her presence, he turned, his blue eyes widening in surprise. "Miss Thorne," he greeted, his voice echoing in the stillness of the church. "I wasn't expecting visitors at this hour. Is something amiss?" His gaze was searching, filled with a mixture of concern and apprehension. Evelyn hesitated, unsure how to begin. The doubts that had plagued her moments before now seemed foolish, dwarfed by the chilling certainty that settled over her. She had stumbled upon a truth that had haunted Blackwood for generations, a truth that Father Matthias, for all his piety and compassion, had chosen to keep hidden. "Father," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I know about the pact." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken truths and long-held fears. Father Matthias stiffened, his gaze hardening as a shadow of fear flickered across his features. For a long moment he simply stared at her, his silence speaking volumes. "I don't know what you're talking about," he finally replied, his voice strained, devoid of its usual warmth. He turned away, his gaze fixed on the flickering candles on the altar. "Blackwood is a peaceful village, Miss Thorne. We have our traditions, our beliefs, but nothing sinister, nothing that should concern an outsider." Evelyn stepped closer, her voice firm despite the tremor that ran through her. "Don't you see? That's the problem. Silence only strengthens the darkness. It festers, grows stronger, feeds on our fear." She met his gaze, her own filled with a mixture of anger and desperation. How many more sacrifices will it take, Father? How many more lives will be lost before you acknowledge the truth? Father Matthias turned then, his shoulders slumping as if a great weight had settled upon them. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, his face etched with a weariness that seemed to have aged him years. "You know nothing, child," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You stumble in the dark, chasing shadows, oblivious to the true nature of the evil that lurks at the heart of this village." He stepped closer, his blue eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and warning. "Some truths are best left buried, Miss Thorne. Some doors are meant to remain closed. Turn back now while you still can before it's too late." Evelyn stood her ground, undeterred by the priest's warning. Fear, she realized, was a powerful weapon, one that had been used to silence the villagers, to keep them trapped in a cycle of denial and despair. But fear could also be a catalyst, a force that pushed one to confront the darkness, to fight for the truth, no matter the cost. "It's already too late, Father," she replied, her voice firm despite the tremor that ran through her. "The entity is awake, it's watching, waiting for its next victim, and this time it won't be satisfied with just one life." She thought of Alice, the strange girl with the knowing eyes, her warnings echoing in her ears. She thought of Sarah, her journal, a testament to the terror that had gripped her in her final moments. She thought of the villagers, their faces etched with a fear they could barely conceal, their silence a testament to the hold the entity had over them. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows of the church, the sound like the mournful cry of a lost soul. The storm that had been brewing for days was finally breaking, the sky above the village a swirling mass of dark clouds. "The pact has to be broken," she continued, her voice unwavering. "The entity's reign of terror has to end once and for all." She met Father Matthias's gaze, her own filled with a newfound determination. "Will you help me?" Father Matthias stood frozen, his face pale and drawn in the flickering candlelight. The wind howled outside, a mournful symphony accompanying Evelyn's words. His silence was a battleground of fear and duty, the weight of generations pressing down on him. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "There is a way," he confessed, his gaze dropping to the worn floorboards beneath their feet. "A ritual, an ancient rite passed down through generations of priests, but it is forbidden, fraught with peril. The cost is too high." Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. There was a way to break the entity's hold, to free Blackwood from its curse. But Father Matthias's words were laced with a terror that chilled her to the bone. What sacrifice would this ritual demand? What price would they have to pay to appease the darkness that had haunted them for so long? "Tell me," she breathed, her voice firm despite the tremor that ran through her. "Whatever it takes, I'm ready." Father Matthias hesitated, his gaze searching hers as if gauging her resolve. Then, with a sigh of resignation, he nodded slowly. "Follow me," he whispered, leading her towards a hidden door behind the altar, concealed beneath a tapestry depicting the sorrowful face of the Virgin Mary. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow stone staircase that descended into darkness, the air thick with a musty, ancient scent. As they descended, each step seemed to carry them further away from the world they knew, deeper into the heart of Blackwood's terrible secret. The passage opened into a chamber beneath the church, its walls lined with rough-hewn stone. The air was heavy, stagnant, as if the chamber had been sealed for centuries, its secrets kept hidden from the world above. A single torch sputtered on the wall, casting flickering shadows that danced and swayed, taking on monstrous shapes in the flickering light. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, its surface etched with strange symbols that seemed to writhe and shift as Evelyn watched. Father Matthias moved with a familiarity that belied his earlier hesitation, as if he had walked this path many times before. though his face betrayed his inner turmoil. He lit candles arranged in a circle around the altar, their flames casting a sickly yellow glow that did little to pierce the oppressive darkness. "The ritual is ancient," he explained, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "A pact made between our ancestors and the entity, a desperate bargain struck in a time of famine and fear. They offered the entity what it craved most, sacrifice, in exchange for protection, for survival." He gestured to the altar, his voice strained. "The symbols, they represent the ancient pact, the binding oath that has shackled our village to the entity's will for generations. To break the curse, we must sever the connection, destroy the bond that holds the entity captive." Evelyn's gaze swept the chamber, taking in the weight of history, the palpable sense of dread that permeated every stone, every shadow. This was a place of power, a nexus point where the veil between worlds seemed thin, almost translucent. She could feel the entity's presence, a palpable weight pressing down on her, watching their every move. "But the entity will resist," Father Matthias continued, his voice barely a whisper now. "It will demand a price, a final sacrifice to appease its hunger. We must be prepared." Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. A final sacrifice. What did the entity desire? What offering would be enough to satisfy its ancient hunger? Before she could voice her fears, the chamber began to tremble, the air growing thick and heavy, as if a storm were gathering within the confines of the stone walls. The torch on the wall sputtered and died, plunging them into darkness. A cold wind swept through the chamber, carrying with it a chorus of whispers, faint and indistinct, yet filled with a chilling malice that sent shivers down Evelyn's spine. The shadows on the wall seemed to writhe and coalesce, taking on grotesque shapes that stretched and twisted, their forms shifting and changing, defying definition. And then she saw it. A figure emerged from the darkness, its form shifting and swirling, composed of shadows and smoke, yet possessing a terrible solidity that made Evelyn's breath catch in her throat. Its eyes, two glowing embers in the darkness, fixed on her, their gaze filled with a malevolent intelligence that seemed to pierce her very soul, reading her deepest fears, her most guarded secrets. Evelyn stumbled back, her hand instinctively reaching for the silver crucifix she wore around her neck, her only protection against the encroaching darkness. She had faced her fears before, had delved into the annals of history, had sought to understand the darkness that haunted Blackwood. But nothing, not even Sarah's chilling account in her journal, could have prepared her for this, for the sheer, overwhelming terror that emanated from the creature before her. The entity towered over them, its form shifting and changing, a grotesque mockery of human form. Its voice, when it spoke, was a chorus of whispers, a symphony of dread that seemed to seep into her very bones, chilling her to the core. "You dare to defy me?" it hissed, its voice a thousand whispers blending into one chilling voice. "You, a mere mortal who stumbles in the dark, blind to the true nature of power?" Evelyn fought to maintain her composure, to meet the entity's gaze without flinching. Fear, she knew, was a weapon, one that the entity wielded with chilling expertise. She would not give it the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Blackwood suffers under your reign," she countered, her voice trembling slightly, yet filled with a conviction that surprised even her. "The pact is broken. Your time here is over." The entity laughed. A chilling sound that echoed through the chamber, a symphony of malice and despair. "You misunderstand," it hissed, its form shifting, growing larger, more menacing. "The pact cannot be broken, only transferred. A life for a life, a soul for a soul. That is the price of freedom." It leaned closer, its shadowy form swirling around her, threatening to engulf her. "Choose," it whispered, its voice a caress of ice against her skin. "Your life or theirs." Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The weight of their choice pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. Her life in exchange for the freedom of Blackwood, her soul for the chance to break the cycle of fear and sacrifice that had haunted the village for generations. Could she do it? Could she make that sacrifice, knowing the cost? The entity waited, its silence a palpable pressure in the air, the fate of Blackwood hanging precariously in the balance. Evelyn closed her eyes, drawing strength from the silver crucifix she clutched in her hand, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. The time had come to make a choice that would determine not only her own fate, but the fate of Blackwood itself. Silence descended upon the chamber, heavy and absolute. The echoes of the entity's whispers faded, leaving behind a chilling emptiness. The air, thick moments before with menace, now felt strangely still, cleansed. Evelyn stood, her legs trembling, her hand still clutching the silver crucifix. She had made her choice, a choice born of desperation and a sliver of hope, a choice that had irrevocably altered the fabric of her life. Father Matthias lay on the stone floor, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow but steady. The entity was gone, its hold on Blackwood broken, its power dispersed, but the victory felt hollow, the price paid etched into the very lines of Evelyn's face. She could no longer leave Blackwood, bound to the village by an unseen tether, a consequence of the pact she had forged. The entity's mark, a faint swirling pattern, throbbed on the back of her hand, a constant reminder of the darkness she had confronted, the darkness that now resided within her. She had saved Blackwood, spared them from the entity's hunger, but at a cost. A wave of exhaustion washed over her, a bone-deep weariness that seemed to seep into her very soul. The villagers, unaware of the battle fought beneath their feet, would awaken to a new dawn, a day free from the oppressive fear that had clung to them for generations. They would rebuild their lives, their laughter echoing through the cobblestone streets, their children playing without the shadow of the entity looming over them. And Evelyn, she would remain, a silent guardian, her life intertwined with Blackwood's fate. The entity was gone, but the shadows, she knew, lingered, whispering of ancient evils, of forgotten pacts, of the delicate balance between the world she knew and the darkness that lay just beyond the veil. She was no longer just a historian, a seeker of forgotten truths. She was now a protector, a keeper of secrets, her life forever bound to the village she had saved. The days that followed were a blur of activity and hushed conversations. The villagers, sensing the shift in the air, the lifting of the oppressive weight that had shrouded them for generations, emerged from their homes, their faces etched with a mixture of confusion and cautious hope. Father Matthias, recovered from the ordeal, attributed the change to divine intervention, a miracle bestowed upon them for their unwavering faith. Evelyn, true to her word, remained silent. Her role in Blackwood's newfound peace, a secret shared only with the old priest. She moved through the village, a ghost in their midst, observing, listening, always vigilant. The shadows still called to her, whispering of the entity's lingering presence, but they no longer held the same power. She was no longer prey, but guardian, her connection to the darkness a double-edged sword, a source of both strength and constant vigilance. She continued her research, delving deeper into the village's archives, seeking knowledge, understanding. The entity might be gone, but the pact, the ancient magic that had bound it to Blackwood, still resonated, its echoes whispering of other forgotten evils, of a world teetering on the precipice of darkness. She studied the ancient symbols, the rituals, the forgotten lore, preparing herself for a battle that might never come, a battle she knew she might have to fight alone. Nightfall found her drawn to the edge of the forest, the scent of pine and damp earth a familiar comfort. The trees, once menacing, now seemed almost welcoming, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling like whispers of forgotten secrets. She could feel the entity's absence, a void in the fabric of the world, a silence that was both deafening and strangely reassuring. She was the guardian of that silence, the protector of Blackwood's fragile peace. And as she stood there beneath the watchful gaze of the ancient trees, she knew that her life, once defined by dusty books and forgotten histories, had found a new purpose, a new meaning. She was the guardian of Blackwood, the keeper of its secrets, the shield against the darkness that lingered at the edge of the light. And though the path ahead was uncertain, fraught with unseen dangers, she would face it with courage and unwavering resolve, her heart bound to the village she had sworn to protect, her soul forever marked by the shadows of Blackwood. A year had passed since the ritual in the chamber beneath the church. A year since the weight of the entity's presence had lifted from Blackwood, allowing the village to breathe again. Evelyn stood at the edge of the forest, the scent of pine needles and damp earth familiar and strangely comforting. The trees, once menacing sentinels guarding ancient secrets, now swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves whispering tales of a time before the pact, before the darkness had seeped into Blackwood's soul. The mark on the back of her hand throbbed faintly, a dull ache that mirrored the melancholic peace that had settled over her. She couldn't leave Blackwood, not anymore. The entity's grip might be broken, but its touch lingered, binding her to the village she had saved. Yet there was a sense of belonging now, a deep-rooted connection to the people and the very earth beneath her feet. The villagers, their initial apprehension giving way to gratitude, had embraced her as one of their own. They greeted her with warm smiles and genuine concern. She had become their protector, a silent guardian against the unseen forces that lurked at the edges of their lives. Alice, the strange girl who seemed to exist between the realms, still visited her, her pronouncements cryptic, her gaze holding a wisdom beyond her years. Evelyn often found solace in their shared silences, in the unspoken understanding that bound them together. Father Matthias, his shoulders lighter, his eyes clear, often joined her on her walks through the village. The weight of the pact, the burden of generations had lifted, leaving behind a quiet strength. They spoke little of that night in the chamber, but a shared understanding passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the darkness they had faced, the sacrifice that had been made. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Evelyn turned back towards the village. She could hear the faint sounds of laughter carried on the breeze, the joyful shouts of children playing in the village square. Life had returned to Blackwood, vibrant and hopeful, and she, the outsider, drawn to its shadows, had found a home, her life forever intertwined with the whispers of the forest, the secrets of the past, and the enduring strength of a village reborn.